And at 10, Chameleon. Being the first villain Spider-Man ever faced way back in Amazing Spider-Man #1 in 1963, I think we're due for a Chameleon appearance in the MCU, and honestly, I think we could be getting it. With the build up to No Way Home on the horizon, with the movie planning to come out this Christmas, I have a sinking feeling that what we'll be seeing isn't exactly a multiverse of villains, but rather Chameleon taking on these other appearances. We've already had a theory of the Chameleon being present in Far From Home, especially since John Watts revealed that it would be great for the Chameleon to appear in Far From Home before settling on Mysterio, and with the insane technology being present in the MCU at this point, they could really do anything they wanted. So Chameleon really being the villain in No Way Home is certainly what I'm betting on. It would make people mad for sure, but it would be such a good twist. The only way I'm not going to believe it is until either after the movie's done or if we see two villains at the same time. And at 9, Rhino. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man #41 from 1966, the Rhino, otherwise known as Alexei Setsevic, underwent an experimental procedure that gave him an artificial skin and super strength. While not being the brightest or the sharpest tool in the shed, we have already seen a version of this character on the big screen during the final moments of the Amazing Spider-Man 2, which means that we may actually see him in the next Spider-Man MCU movie, if this actually does turn out to be the multiverse and not the Chameleon. However, if we do end up seeing a true MCU version, I'd rather have one closer to the original or the Spider-Man Sony video game rather than the mechanized one we see in Amazing Spider-Man 2. Just personal preference. Not everyone can have outstanding technology, right? Plus, the mech version is more along the lines of the Ultimate Universe, and after that whole Wanda Pietro thing, I'm staying well away from that. And at 8, Hobgoblin. Being introduced in Amazing Spider-Man #238 in 1983, the Hobgoblin was inspired by the work of Green Goblin and has been a moniker used by a few individuals, including the original Roderick Kingsley, followed by Jason McIndale during the late 80s and 90s, and after that Phil Urich. The character also made an appearance in the 1990s Spider-Man animated series and actually appeared before the Green Goblin made his debut in that show. With No Way Home introducing the Green Goblin to the MCU, and Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin no less, the potential for someone to be inspired by him is present, and if Norman ends up leaving his glider behind, Hobgoblin would have an easy time either stealing it or acquiring it and using it for his own nefarious means. Hobgoblin honestly used to freak me out as a kid. I can't quite remember why, but either way I'd love to see an adaptation of this character appear in the MCU facing off against Tom Holland's Spider-Man. It would also give him his own unique Goblin since Tobey already got the most iconic one. And at 7, Spider-Side. Spider-Side is a more obscure and odd Spider-Man villain that I still think would make a great addition to the MCU. Being first introduced as Spider-Side in New Warriors #61, this version of Peter Parker is one of the clones made by Dr. Miles Warren, which is an entirely separate villain that could also appear, but I'm sure they would explain this away with someone remembering Mysterio revealing Peter's identity and then gaining a DNA sample. What's notable about Spider-Side, however, is not only him having all of Spider-Man's powers, but also the ability to stretch and warp his body at will, similar to Mr. Fantastic, which could be another way to introduce the Fantastic Four to the MCU as well. Spider-Side is also definitely deadly, helping Jackal to release a virus in Springfield, Pennsylvania, resulting in the deaths of over 2,600 people. Is it likely that this character will appear in the MCU? No. But would I love to see it? Absolutely. And at 6, Morbius. Michael Morbius will be getting his own movie in 2022. However, it is not planned to be a part of the MCU, rather a part of the SSU, Sony's Spider-Man universe, along with Venom, Venom Let There Be Carnage, and Kraven the Hunter. First introduced in Amazing Spider-Man #101 in 1971, Dr. Michael Morbius was a scientist born in Greece who became a Nobel Prize-winning biochemist. He was suffering from a blood disease and developed an experimental treatment in an effort to cure it. Its side effects, though, turned him into vampire Jason, who ended up needing to consume blood in order to survive and gain typical vampire characteristics such as aversion to sunlight and the powers of flight, enhanced strength, speed, and a healing factor. His overall appearance also changed as well. He gained fangs, his nose flattened to appear more like a bat, and his skin became extremely pale like me but with less of a nose and sharper teeth. Additionally, the victims of his bite would turn into living vampires themselves, which is absolutely crazy. This character also made an appearance in the 90s Spider-Man animated series, however it was a kids show so he had to consume plasma instead of blood, and his origin was changed as well when he spliced his DNA with Peter Parker's using the neurogenic recombinator and a bat jumped in front of the ray. Would I like to see him in the MCU? Of course, he's an iconic villain, but I don't know if Sony is gonna let go of the leash that they have around the other Spider-Man characters, considering how well Spider-Man's doing in the MCU and they ain't making enough profit from it. Just saying. Halfway through into number 5, Toxin. Born from Carnage as the 1000th symbiote in its lineage, Toxin was feared to be the strongest and most dangerous of their race by both Venom and Carnage. Shortly after being born, the symbiote united with police officer Pat Mulligan. Years later, the symbiote was removed from Mulligan by Blackheart, who beat Pat Mulligan to death in a gutter. With the help of Venom, Jack-O-Lantern took it to its boss, Crime Master. Crime Master, though, found the perfect host in Eddie Brock, who he forced to become Toxin's host. You know, Eddie Brock, the former host of Venom. After bonding with Eddie, Toxin took over its host and worked with the Savage Six, attacking its grandfather symbiote Venom. And with Toxin seemingly coming to the big screen in the future, being introduced in Let There Be Carnage, okay, well, Pat Mulligan was introduced, and then he had some like freaky thing happen with his eyes near the end of the movie, but still, it's very close to it. This guy is also just a freaking freak, okay? He can grow fangs and claws when he's angry. It just happens. It's not something that he thinks of, it just happens. Something that Venom and Carnage are unable to do. However, Toxin is also unable to be tracked by Venom or Carnage, as well as being immune to Spider-Man's spider sense. So this dude is hella off the radar, which only makes things freakier. And in 4, Anti-Venom. When Eddie Brock separated from the Venom symbiote, traces of it were still left in his body. Later though, suffering from cancer, Brock started working as a volunteer in the Feast Center. Martin Lee, the founder of Feast, and the alter ego of the supervillain Mr. Negative, used his powers to cure Eddie's cancer. But in the process, Lee accidentally infused the remnants of the symbiote in Eddie's bloodstream with his power, and fused them to his white blood cells, creating a new hybrid symbiote which manifested when the Venom symbiote attempted to leave its then current host Matt Gargan and return to Eddie. This new symbiote, dubbed Anti-Venom by Eddie, demonstrated tremendous healing powers and other powers that differ from the Venom symbiote, as well as having an inverted color scheme, or a negative color scheme, if you will, such as producing antibodies that can cure any known disease and removing any other impurities within a human body. Unlike other symbiotes though, this symbiote is completely mindless, and Eddie Brock is in full control of its actions. This symbiote was destroyed when it was used as the cure for the spider virus, which had turned various characters into human spider hybrids. However, it was remade as Agent Anti-Venom after Flash Thompson ended up getting soaked with Anti-Venom serum. That's a whole other story. Getting close to the end, and in number 3, Shathra. An inhabitant of the astral plane, Shathra is the spider wasp to Peter Parker's spider. She learned of Spider-Man when he strayed from the safe path during a visit to the astral plane to locate the interdimensional kidnapper known as the Shade. Shathra immediately realized Spider-Man's true nature and determined that he would make the perfect meal for her hungry young hatchlings. Great! First introduced in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2 number 46 in 2002, Shathra quickly followed Spider-Man's scent back to Earth. She engaged Spider-Man in a battle that demonstrated her clearly superior speed and strength, but Spider-Man was able to use his superior knowledge of New York City to find temporary escape. But of course he only knew that it was a matter of time before Shathra would locate him once more. Shathra turned the game in a new direction though, changing to a human form and adopting the name Sharon Keller. And she went on TV to pose as Spider-Man's jitted lover. She went on TV and revealed a series of convincing and humiliating details, and of course this made Mary Jane upset. So, spurred on by Mary Jane's distress, Peter rose to the taunt. He gatecrashed the studio interview and attacked Sharon Keller in full view of, live TV. Shathra reverted to her Spider-Wasp form, but her gambit had achieved its goal of pushing Spider-Man to act on pure instinct, which ended up making him the prey, because they were at their actual primordial positions. He was the prey, she was the hunter because she's the Spider-Wasp. You get it, you get it. But ultimately, in at number 2, Chameleon. Being the first villain Spider-Man ever faced way back in Amazing Spider-Man number 1 from 1963 and my costume from yesterday, I think that Chameleon is a more underrated villain than he should be. Being able to look like anyone at any time is pretty damn overpowered, especially when you can use it to look like Spider-Man and even use suction cups to stick to walls, even if it's slightly unrealistic. This character is especially powerful when he has superpowers, like in the 90s animated Spider-Man series, where after Alistair Smythe infused him with a techno-organic virus, could simply look at you and end up transforming into you. It's actually insanely overpowered when you look at it like that, since he can also transform his clothes. He could be fleeing from Spider-Man and turn the corner and then be anyone, so it's certainly someone to fear, unless they use the original version who has to use disguises and makeup to look like anyone they want, since that process takes time and can't be turned on and off. And finally, in at number 1, the Spot. As a scientist working for the Kingpin, Dr. Owen was assigned to reproduce the radiation levels of the Vigilante cloak to find a way to artificially mimic his powers. Working late one night, he succeeded, creating a solid black circular portal. In doing so, however, the drain on the city's power became so great that a blackout washed over the city, causing the portal to shimmer and destabilize. Fearful of losing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Owen stepped into it, and the power shortage caused the portal to send him to a different dimension, a place of half darkness and half light. When Owen emerged back into his lab, his body had undergone a radical transformation. The portals from the other dimension had adhered to his skin, covering him with black spots from head to toe. The reason this is absolutely terrifying, and is the most overpowered villain you wouldn't expect, is because he now had the ability to control these portals. If the man wanted to decapitate you, he easily could. Just close a portal at any part of your body, and then boom, amputation, around your neck, you're dead. It's horrifying. Spider-Man in the 90s cartoon would use these portals to land a punch on Owen, but if Owen just decided to close it or he lost his focus to keep them open, that would have been real bad. Just stay away from this guy, straight up. Don't even try to fight him.
Number 10, Electro. Electro, even in his first appearance in issue 9 of the original Amazing Spider-Man series, was beating Spider-Man. At least, initially. When Spider-Man first meets Electro, he doesn't know what to do, and Electro gets away a few times before Spider-Man manages to stop him. At one point, Spider-Man even reaches out to try and grab Electro. Not a great idea. While Electro is in his electric shock condition, his words, not mine, it turns out touching him is deadly. Spider-Man survives the great electric shock he is given, but is forced to modify his costume in order to take on Electro in the future. He adds on rubber slippers and gloves, and likely in the future would make modifications to his costume, adding in rubber insulation in case he came up against the villain again, which he would many times, because yeah, that's only issue 9. It goes on for a lot longer than issue 9. Number 9, Mephisto. Mephisto might not win in the most obvious ways, but he definitely is always sneakily on the up and up when it comes to him versus heroes. Any heroes really, Spider-Man included. In the case of Mephisto versus Spider-Man, that sounded more legal than I intended, but I guess we are dealing with binding contracts. Mephisto ended up helping Peter to get what he needed, but at a price. He required in exchange Peter's marriage to MJ, which for comic book continuity meant undoing that rocky but ongoing union. Spider-Man got what he wanted, Aunt May was safe and his identity was a secret once more, but I don't think he really realized what he was giving up until he experienced it. MJ didn't even seem to recall their marriage, although lately it seems to be implied that she might have known more about their past than she's let on. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you love it when I talk about villains, I love talking about villains, then be sure to show that love by giving this video a thumbs up. It really does help us out here. I'm not just saying that. They don't just pay me to say that, this is the truth. Number 8, Chameleon. In his first appearance, Chameleon left Spider-Man running away in tears, ruining the day he ever became Spider-Man. Chameleon may have been apprehended in the end of issue number 1 of Amazing Spider-Man, but somehow it still felt as though he came out on top. Dang it, because Chameleon, he's a villain, so he shouldn't win. Although I am kind of rooting for him sometimes. During their conflict, Chameleon attempted to make it seem as though Spider-Man was up to no good, impersonating him while committing acts of thievery and fleeing from the police. Oh no! Even once Spider-Man managed to catch him, it still seemed as though Chameleon might get away. Fortunately, Spider-Man had his spider sense to let him know something was up. He managed to get away from Chameleon, but it was only because Chameleon's disguise had become damaged in the fray that the villain was caught at all. So Spider-Man didn't even really win that day. It was more just like Chameleon made a mistake. And it was like, dang it. Now it's revealed who I am, because you can see the Spider-Man suit underneath and I was impersonating Spider-Man. How embarrassing. Number 7, Morlun. Not only has Morlun proven himself to be a formidable foe in various storylines, with him taking on all of the Spider-Verse twice in the Spider-Verse event and Spider-Geddon in the comics, in addition to taking out multiple Spider-Folks / Spider-Totems along the way, but he also went toe-to-toe with Spider-Man in the other. The worst thing / I guess best thing for Morlun fans about this story is how Morlun doesn't just ever go for the like 1-2 knockout. Morlun seems to prefer drawing out his victory, teasing his victim if you will, and enjoying Spider-Man's suffering. It's probably because Morlun's used to winning so much. He's used to devouring spider totems, so he's like, we'll just let this play out. At one point, Morlun devours Spider-Man's eye in a fight and beats him to within an inch of his life. However, while this definitely feels like a victorious moment for Morlun and Spider-Man was beat here, he would eventually recover, meaning that Morlun didn't get a straight victory over Spider-Man. In fact, he'd even like heal his eye back. But of course, villainous victories rarely ever get to be permanent, so I think we still need to count this one. Number 6, the Lizard. While Lizard doesn't do anything crazy like succeed in completely killing Spider-Man or anything like that, he does beat him in the race against time to save his friend, Dr. Curt Connors, who, you know, is also the Lizard. In the story Shed, the Lizard ends up taking over before Spider-Man can get there to try and stop it. Spider-Man arrives far too late as the Lizard seems to have permanently gained dominance after devouring Curt Connors' son against his own will. This victory would be one that would not only haunt Spider-Man but the Doctor as well. He would end up finding a way to cure himself of his lizard brain but become stuck in his lizard form, kept in a containment cell for his crimes, but unable to bring himself to reveal Spider-Man that he had finally cured himself mentally of his reptilian half. This whole thing is just like a super big Lizard win in my mind, because even when Connors frees himself of the Lizard, he's still stuck in the lizard form, and he still is like, I feel too guilty to even be able to tell people what's really going on. So the Lizard like really won, even though he was gone. Number 5, Vulture. The Vulture is another villain who also got a pretty big boost from making his way to the big screen in the first Spider-Man MCU film, Homecoming. In this movie, he's played by Michael Keaton, who absolutely delivered when it came to his version of Adrian Toomes, a down-on-his-luck salvage company owner who, after losing a major contract, is forced to turn to a life of crime to provide for his family. I actually really loved this version of Vulture. It was so good. Vulture then maybe gets a little carried away with that whole side hustle, becoming, you guessed it, a supervillain. Not only is Adrian still out there in the world and still a great threat to Peter as he actually knows his secret identity, but it's also been implied in the Morbius trailers that he might have found his way out of prison. In the comics, Vulture is currently leading the Savage Six, one of the multiple Sinister Six teams headed Spider-Man's way. Or at least in Spider-Man's vicinity. All these Sinister Sixes have their own motives, but they're all going to be at least fighting around Spider-Man, I think. Spider-Man's definitely going to be there and be like, oh, I don't want to deal with this. Number 4, Norman Osborn. Green Goblin, Red Goblin, Goblin King, or just Norman Osborn. Whatever name he's going by at the time, Norman Osborn still remains one of the most powerful Spider-Man villains that we've ever seen. Remember when he threatened not just Peter Parker, but pretty much all the heroes and civilians of Earth during Dark Reign, when he became the head of a new organization he'd created to replace S.H.I.E.L.D., Hammer? Not to mention, he also became the Iron Patriot, aka the Iron Man stand-in of his own Dark Avengers team. Of course, lately he's been taking a bit of a back seat as he's more focused on working to help his son Harry Osborn, who is currently taking over the reins in Spider-Man as one of the main big bads currently. Well, kind of. It's complicated. Still, you can't deny the years of history between Norman and Peter and how much Norman Osborn has tried to drive Spider-Man insane. And so for that fact, we still gotta put him, I think, pretty high up on the list, because you can't erase that history. Number 3, Lizard. Lizard is back to Shed levels of scary currently in the comics as we gear up for Sinister War. In order to get the villain back on the Sinister Six team, he had his reptile half separated completely from Curt Connors, meaning that he's full animal instincts and is out for blood. Definitely a deadly loose cannon you want to keep your eyes on, especially considering in the past, it's usually been Doc Connors' presence within that beast that has allowed Spider-Man to defeat the villain, usually finding a way to appeal to his humanity. But with his humanity stripped away, Lizard is being set up to become more deadly than ever. And I am here for it. It's Lizard's turn, baby. Number 2, Kindred. Kindred for a while was one of the biggest and most mysterious baddies that Spider-Man was up against in his own series. We didn't really know who Kindred was for a long time, or what his deal was, other than he knew Peter very well, and also seemed to bear a long-time grudge against both him and villain Norman Osborn. He also seemed to have a soft spot for Mary Jane. This would all make a lot more sense when Kindred was revealed to be Harry Osborn. As Kindred, Harry is now kind of part demon, and is likely in league with another big bad from hell. Although the other side to that is that Harry is also kind of trapped in a cell, so There's a lot going on here. There's still a lot to unpack with Kindred in terms of the mysteries. Kindred has centipedes that he can use to control others and influence them. He can also manipulate people's dreams, teleport, appears to be invulnerable, and can resurrect the dead. All in all, he's a pretty intimidating villain, with or without the mystery that once surrounded him, and still kinda does surround him. Number 1. Mephisto. Mephisto has proven to be another key player not just in Peter Parker's life as his antagonist, but also just in the Spider-Verse in general. He's also gotten involved in messing with the lives of Miles Morales, Spider-Gwen aka Ghost Spider as we know her now, and even Superior Spider-Man aka Doc Ock. Mephisto, it seems, is going to be coming back with even more surprises for Peter. In Sinister War, we know that Spider-Man will be going up not just against Kindred, but also multiple versions of the Sinister Six, each with their own motives. Perhaps he'll be wresting his marriage from the villain, as that seems to be where we've been headed for a while with this build-up. We're also definitely going to get to see Mephisto face off with Doctor Strange, so there's a lot of cool stuff going on. It's great.
Coming in number 10, we have Shocker. I think back when this villain was created, the idea of having someone who had vibrations as their superpower would have been a little bit harder to make fun of. Now, many of you probably know Shocker. He has had a few moments in the sun, popping up in video games, and he even has a moment as one of the henchmen of the Vulture. Now you think someone who is canon in the MCU wouldn't fit onto this list, but when we break him down, we start to learn that Shocker isn't that shocking. It would seem that this villain has a knack for losing to Spider-Man every single time, and it's probably because his powers aren't that impressive. He can make shockwaves that blast through the air, and he can make vibration shields. Yeah, I'm not that impressed by what you have to offer. In recent years, we have seen less and less of this punchline of a villain, as I think the writers have seen that his time has come, and he will soon be put to bed. As a kid, I always got him and Electro mixed up because I thought Shocker meant that he was electrocuting people because he was shocking them. Well, at least for the new generation, you won't have those problems because this guy is going to be gone pretty soon. Coming in at number 9, we have White Rabbit. I mean, right when we start breaking down this villain, you will learn why she is on this list. It's one thing to be a down and out loser who's had enough of the cruel world and now wants to dive into a world of crime because everything else has let them down. But when you come from a rich family and you turn to crime just for the sake of being angsty, then I don't really have much compassion for you, and your character isn't really relatable. The White Rabbit, also known as Lorena Dodson, built her persona off the Alice in Wonderland book. She thought that would be a cool and edgy way to get into the world of crime. I think she just indulged in too many psychedelics and maybe went off the deep end. I wouldn't be surprised if this character was inspired by the rise of LSD in the 80s when this character was birthed. In terms of powers, she has zero. All she has is a bad attitude and a general understanding of martial arts. She's not a villain that any of us are clamoring for. Coming in at number 8, we have Mindworm. You know, for some of these villains, it seems that the writers went to so much work to really come up with someone who was interesting and had motivations for evil, but then they just throw them in the toilet, and that's what really happens with Mindworm. Mindworm starts off great. He has powers from birth. He's some sort of mutant kid with a huge head. Of course, he's weird and kids don't like him, but at least his parents love his huge cranium. But what Mindworm doesn't know is that he's feeding off the psionic energy of his parents, draining their brain. Eventually, he gets too greedy with this and he kills his own mother and father. He didn't mean to do this. He was just a young mutant kid who didn't know any better, and now he was an orphan. From there, he was bullied in the orphanage and he learns how to use his powers. Eventually, he grows up and is living in a New York apartment where he's feeding off all the people in the building and getting pretty strong off this. But Spider-Man moves in and he senses that someone's trying to suck out his brain energy. The two have a clash and Mindworm is killed by some gang members. Like, all of that work into building up who this guy is, and he was gone just like that. What a waste. Coming in at number 7, we have Gibbon. We got back-to-back orphanage stories for you. In fact, this one sounds like a cross between Mindworm and Robin. Gibbon is basically the missing link. He has all the abilities of a chimp that are amplified way up. He's got super strength, speed, awareness, reflexes. This guy is off the charts when you're talking about his Madden stats. But because of his monkey-like ways, the kids didn't really like him in the orphanage, and he was never adopted. Now, this ended with him growing up and leaving like a regular dude, dude, but now he was just a freak with no money, so he decided he could use his mutations to make some cash. And what's the best way for an oddity to make a quick buck? Well, the circus, of course. There you would think he would be among his people, but he was rejected once again, and now he turned to a life of villainy. When we first see Gibbon, he's just a dude that has some monkey skills, but in later renditions of his character, he looks like a full-on ape man. And even though he has the abilities to take down Spidey, the clashes between the two always end up with Gibbon on his butt. Coming in at number 6, we have the Answer. Now this guy is actually pretty cool. He's just used in a very lame way, and his name sucks. The Answer was already a skilled assassin. He was working for the mob boss of all mob bosses, Wilson Fisk. Anyone Fisk wanted taken down, he was all over it. And part of why he was so good at his job was because the Answer, at this time he was known as Aaron Nichols, is extremely intelligent. He showcases genius level problem solving skills, and he can come up with the answer to any problem. And this is all before he ever gets any sort of superpowers. There was a time in comics when the Kingpin was just handing out superpowers, but you don't give the first powers to someone you can't trust, so he of course gave his first dose of super juice to his buddy Aaron. But at first glance, nothing happened, which is probably a relief and a bummer, because if you take some sort of experimental drug to give yourself powers, you want to get the superpowers, but you also don't want to come out a freak. But later, the Answer learns that he has one of the most powerful superpowers I have ever heard of. No matter what the situation, when he is faced with a conflict, his body will supply him with the powers to counter who or whatever he's fighting. So normally he's just a guy, but when the time calls for it, he can fly or create force fields or get super strength. But after a run-in with Spidey that he wins, the character just kind of disappears and we don't see him that much. This guy fits on this list because of the wasted potential.
Halfway through, and at number 5, Venom 2099. Venom 2099 is actually Kron Stone, the son of Tyler Stone, and as revealed later on, the older half-brother of Miguel O'Hara, who is the Spider-Man of 2099. Talk about family issues. Kron became violent and brutal after suffering for years because of his abusive robot maid. Yeah, this is certainly an interesting origin. Either way, this all drove him into killing Punisher 2099's family. This was also before gaining any superpowers, since the encounter with Jake Gallows, who is Punisher 2099, nearly gets him killed. So Kron flees into the sewer, narrowly escaping with his life. And, you know, since he was absolutely destroyed and hardly clinging to life, he ended up floating down the sewer, eventually running into this strange black ball. This black ball was actually the mutated form of the Venom symbiote that had somehow survived without a host all this time. The symbiote, who was also on the brink of death, bonded to Kron and they became Venom 2099. This new version of the Venom symbiote also had acidic saliva and blood, so that does make him more dangerous than the original Venom. But Miguel was still able to come out on top. Attaboy Miguel. Spider-Man 2099's costume is so sick, man. And at 4, Carnage. When the Venom symbiote came to rescue its host Eddie Brock from jail, it left an asexually produced offspring behind. This spawn bonded to Cletus Cassidy, a renowned serial killer in the Marvel Universe, through a wound on his hand, merging with his blood and becoming red and black in color. Now going by the name of Carnage, Cletus became a deadly recurring enemy to both Spider-Man and Venom. Eventually, Carnage fought Spider-Man and actually beat him. Realizing that Carnage was another symbiote villain, Spider-Man enlisted the aid of Venom, who was actually retired at the time, to defeat him. After enlisting Venom's aid against Carnage, Spider-Man later used loud noises in an attempt to defeat both Cletus and Venom, which is a stone cold move. However, thanks to Cletus' psychopathic tendencies and the fact that he was created on Earth, he has a lot more abilities than his father, like shooting itself as a projectile and forming razor-sharp weapons to tear through both innocents and his enemies, with chef-like precision, may I add. Getting close to the end, in at number 3, Atrocity. Introduced and only seen in the Spider-Man game Spider-Man Edge of Time from 2011, Atrocity was created after Anti-Venom went into a blind rage, accidentally knocking Otto Octavius and Walker Sloan into Walker Sloan's gateway. Time-traveling gateway, by the way. The three then fused in the space-time continuum. I tried getting Taylor to put this on a list for ages, so here I am putting it here because holy damn, this is a villain. Atrocity would occasionally attack Parker or O'Hara with its teleportation tentacles throughout their journey in the Alchemax building, until it eventually revealed itself and attacked Peter Parker. Atrocity was defeated, but would later appear again, attempting to kill Peter Parker at the same time that the CEO of Alchemax was fighting Miguel O'Hara. We, as Parker, manipulated Atrocity into attacking electrified pillars, stunning it. Peter then took this opportunity to remove Atrocity's tentacles and send them through the time gateway. These tentacles were then used to drain the Alchemax CEO of his powers. After both Atrocity and the Alchemax CEO, who is revealed to be Peter Parker, were vulnerable, they were knocked into the gateway together simultaneously, resetting the timeline. This absolute monstrosity is also able to teleport himself through time and space, in the addition to all of his powers. So yeah, an atrocity for sure. Penultimately, in number 2, Red Goblin. After the collapse of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Carnage symbiote was secured in the Lockbox, a privately run vault at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Agents Crane and Coleman, though, infiltrated the Lockbox and stole the symbiote, delivering it to their employer, Norman Osborn. After receiving the symbiote, Osborn bonded with it to become the new Carnage, hoping that it would be the key to regaining his Green Goblin persona. While the symbiote initially seized control of him, Norman offered to teach it more nuanced and sadistic ways to kill people, an offer that the symbiote eagerly accepted, turning over control to its new host, restoring his appearance and purging his body of the nanites, preventing him from augmenting himself with the Goblin formula. Osborn then used the symbiote to kill Phil Urich, and after pretending to be mortally wounded in a rematch against Spider-Man as the Green Goblin, unveiled his new partner by transforming into the monstrous Red Goblin. Osborn used the symbiote to great effect, incapacitating Spider-Man's allies and loved ones, and bonding a portion of it to his grandson Normie Osborn to turn him into the Goblin Child. Spidey was only able to defeat Red Goblin by taunting Osborn, saying that killing him in that form would only give Carnage the credit and not him, which caused him to rip off the symbiote. Then Spider-Man was able to destroy it. Finally, and at number 1, Graviton. If you're not familiar with Graviton, just know that he's essentially Magneto, but with gravity instead of metal, which is already making you think, oh, and that's exactly right. During the Acts of Vengeance crossover storyline, Graviton essentially crushed Spider-Man in their first encounter, only for Spider-Man to come back and absolutely wipe the floor with him when he got the Captain Universe powers. But that may seem a little cheap when talking about a list of Spider-Man villains. So, how about when Graviton was a part of a group of villains that sought revenge on Spider-Man following the loss of his cosmic powers? Spider-Man was still able to defeat Graviton without the power cosmic. During the fight though, Graviton actually disabled Spider-Man's gravity, sending the web slinger floating up into the sky. But Spider-Man was able to web onto a passing plane before he actually got too high. And then when Spidey got back to the ground and to the fight, he took an unprotected by gravity Graviton out with one single punch. So needless to say, Spider-Man has some pretty sick licks to lay out. And at 10, shocker. Herman Schultz's parents died when his younger brother Marty was a boy. From a young age, Schultz turned to a life of crime. However, he soon realized that he wasn't really good at it, having been arrested several times. After one robbery gone wrong, he got arrested again, but was sent to a prison workshop, where he used the resources around him to build gauntlets that sent out shock waves, which quickly opened safes as well, giving himself a one-up on the authorities, a much needed one. Now I know what you're thinking, but how could a guy named Herman be any form of powerful? Well, the Shocker had the ability to shock his enemies with his handheld vibro shock units. But because the vibrations were so fierce, he wore a heavily insulated suit, and during his first outing as the self-styled Shocker, he ran into and defeated Spider-Man. Plus, I mean, he's the Shocker. He shocks people. And at 9, Hydro Man. Morris Bench was born and raised in the Bronx, New York. He began working as a crewman on cargo ship, but he was accidentally knocked overboard by Spider-Man while a powerful experimental generator was being lowered into the ocean for testing. Exposed to the energy conversion process of the generator while being bombarded with volcanic gas, Bench's cellular structure was altered. When he was rescued from the depths though, his body began extruding great quantities of some watery substance, which Bench first attributed to just being sweat. Annoyed by the incessant dripping, Bench went to a local pub to stir up trouble, finding none, but he was astonished to learn that he could convert his entire physical form into basically water. While he may just be a form of Sandman, being able to convert to water instead of sand, he certainly seems more powerful to me. There is water basically everywhere, and our bodies are made of 70% water, so if Bench was able to tap into the water that is in his enemies' bodies, that would be a freaking nightmare. Not to mention a horrible sight. And at 8, the Kingpin. A crime boss is one thing. A crime boss that to the public is a well-respected philanthropist and businessman is something else. Especially a businessman who is like 300 pounds of muscle. Wilson Fisk is an absolute madman who runs most of the New York and Las Vegas criminal underworld. However, things get even more intense after his wife is killed so that he doesn't retire. After the murder of his wife, not only did he resume leadership of his former organization, but he also turned over the files on other criminal criminal leaders to law enforcement through the costumed crime fighter of Daredevil, now with the motive of ridding himself of any rivals, and the ploy actually worked, and as a result of the evidence in the files, many crime leaders, both inside and outside the Magia, were convicted. In the ensuing power vacuum, the Kingpin rebuilt his coalition stronger than before. He moved on to control a great majority of non-Magia East Coast gangs dealing in conventional crimes, and the Kingpin's organization became stronger than any single Magia family in the New York area could ever withstand. We love a savvy businessman. And at 7, Spider-Side. Spider-Side is a more obscure and odd Spider-Man villain that I still think would give the hero a run for his money nowadays. Being first introduced as Spider-Side in New Warriors number 61, this version of Peter Parker is one of the clones made by Dr. Miles Warren, an entirely separate villain that caused the whole clone debacle and the introduction of Ben Reilly and the Scarlet Spider. But what's notable about Spider-Side is not only him having all of Spider-Man's powers, but also the ability to stretch and warp his body at will, similar to Mr. Fantastic. Spider-Side is certainly deadly as well, helping Jackal to release a virus in Springfield, Pennsylvania, which resulted in the deaths of over 2,600 people, which Homer Simpson was definitely not happy about. But either way, Spider-Side with all the abilities of Spider-Man and Mr. Fantastic makes him pretty damn powerful for a villain that not really many people know about. And at 6, Kraven the Hunter. Karanoff found that he had a great talent for finding employment in Kenya, Africa. Karanoff began his career using the typical tools of the hunter, but over time he developed a preference to take down large animals with his bare hands. So, you know, already a psycho in the making. After meeting a voodoo witch doctor named Calypso, Karanoff took a herbal potion which enhanced his physical powers and gave him strength, speed, and senses to match a jungle cat. The potion also extended his life greatly, keeping his health and vitality for years to come. At some point, the notion of big game hunting became a bore to the hunter, so his associate Chameleon, who was later revealed to be his half-brother, proposed to Kraven that he hunt Spider-Man, and thus gave Kraven a new purpose in life. Kraven gained additional powers by drinking more rare and exotic jungle elixirs given to him by his voodoo priestess lover Calypso. These elixirs gave him the strength and speed of a savage beast, and all the better to catch Spider-Man with, right? Despite being assisted by the Chameleon, his scheme failed and he was deported from the US, but he would definitely come back.
Coming in number 5, we have Typeface. You know what everyone loves? Signage! So why don't you make your persona based off that? I'm sure that will pull in a ton of people and you'll become one of the most famous supervillains of all time. No way, man, Signage is super lame. Well, Typeface, also known as Gordon Thomas, didn't think so, and he had a pretty good foundation. He was a Vietnam War vet who was skilled in hand-to-hand combat, military tactics, and all sorts of weapons. He even beat Spider-Man in their first encounter. If this guy changed his theme to anything other than Signage, he probably would have been pretty cool. But the reason that he did this was because when Thomas came back from war, his life fell apart and he ended up getting a job at a sign shop, and it was the only time in his life where he ever felt happy. When the place was bought out, he lost his job, and this was his inspiration to become a villain. Luckily, he eventually switched sides and becomes a hero. If you're gonna get an F on your character, you might as well be on the side of good.
Number 4, The Spot. This guy is something else. Some people think his powers are pretty cool and others hate him, but he definitely belongs on this list. Spider-Man himself bursts into tears laughing upon meeting this guy, and looking like a Dalmatian, it's pretty easy to see why. He's all white, covered in black spots that function as two-way portals. That's pretty much his main thing. He takes the spots and he chucks them around and uses them like portals like this is Looney Tunes, messing around with Spider-Man and even making him punch himself in the face. If this guy doesn't sound lame enough already, the more portals that he throws around, the less spots that he has on his body, making himself more vulnerable. He got these powers after being exposed to the spotted dimension, and the spots can even be suspended in mid-air. It's honestly a pretty cool concept, but the villain himself is just too lame to make it work for me.
And coming in number 3, we have Spider-Side, like genocide but performed by a spider. Yeah, that is not the best writing I've ever heard of in my life. Spider-Side was birthed out of the Clone Saga, which is considered one of the worst sagas in comic history. So any villain to come out of it is probably never going to see the light of day again unless they're used as a joke. Spider-Side is a clone of Spider-Man that has the ability to regenerate from what seems to be any accident. incident. He was convinced at first that he was the real Peter Parker, but then he found out that he was just a freak. Such is the plight of most clones. When you read his character on paper, it sounds super cool. He has the powers of Spider-Man with some of the most deadly features of the Terminator, but the character was used in such a horrible fashion that it became a laughingstock before it ever got its time to shine. Maybe in the future we'll see someone use this character to its full ability.
Number 2. Plant Man. In Strange Tales number 113 from 1963, we meet the mysterious Plant Man. This gardener turned professional criminal was born in London and orphaned at a young age. When he left the orphanage, he became lab assistant to a well-known botanist who was studying the low-level mental activity of plant life. Unfortunately, this guy fired him for focusing too much on this invention he was making and not gardening for him. One day, lightning strikes his plant ray gun that he's been working on, and it becomes imbued with the power to control and animate plant life. Ooh. So he then makes a disguise and sets out to get his revenge for being fired by framing his boss for robbery. The plant life isn't the only thing with low-level mental activity, as this guy made from leaves somehow thinks that he can take on the Human Torch. He is later quickly defeated and his ray gun is destroyed, although I'm sad to say he does appear again in 2002.
And coming at the number 1 spot, we have Big Wheel. This villain's theme is a massive wheel that he rides around and it has guns on it. Reading some of these is like watching a breakdown of a group of YouTubers trying to find out what they need to do so they can set their channel apart from everyone else. Like, maybe if I was the wheel guy, then people would like my content. Well, Big Wheel's just an ordinary guy until the Tinkerer gave him something that was probably a prank, a massive wheel that could ride around and had guns on it. You think something like that would be extremely hard to control, and you would be right. Big Wheel would die when he lost control of his massive wheel car thing and fell into a river and drowned. Here's a lesson for any future villain. If you want to pick a gimmick that is going to set you apart from the rest, before you make a hard decision and invest in a giant wheel that will get you killed and make you look like a fool, you should probably hire a think tank to come up with a better idea. Like I said earlier on in this list, you can pick whatever power you want when you're building it from scratch, so why go with wheels?
Number 10. White Rabbit. White Rabbit is Lorena Dodson, and while she might seem like kind of a joke villain, we've seen some pretty dark storylines featuring her in the past few years. White Rabbit is out currently to prove that she's one of the baddest bads around and earn acclaim and recognition for her misdeeds. In the Absolute Carnage one-shot Symbiote Spider-Man, we get to see White Rabbit featured in a much darker tale when she runs into a judge who at one point came into contact with the Venom symbiote. She ends up getting on his bad side, and in order to get back at him for what she believes was an unfair trial, she comes after him and his son, confronting them with a gun. It turns out the weapon is a joke gun which shoots out a little flag that says "bang," but the shock of the whole event triggers a heart attack in the judge's son, Dan, who dies as a result because he's kinda got a weak heart. White Rabbit is arrested but escapes at her trial, being busted out by a large mech-like rabbit. She torments the judge as she leaves, who attempts to break into the courtroom to kill her but accidentally shoots an innocent court stenographer instead. Lorena might have shown remorse here, but the fact that she messed with this man's life so intensely and then later was absolved of guilt by him killing an innocent man shows just how twisted and cold she can really be. Plus, she has all the money and all that tech to torment her foes with, so there's also that. Is White Rabbit like the Batman of villains in Marvel? That's the question. Number 9. Sin Eater. Sin Eater has definitely been an up-and-comer in the Spider-Man comics lately. He was in league with newish villain Kindred and was working to eradicate sin out in the world. Kindred was actually the one to bring Sin Eater back to life after he died previously in the comics, being a villain who actually goes all the way back to the 80s in terms of his first appearance. First appearing in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man issue 107. After being resurrected by Kindred, Sin Eater, aka Stanley Carter, could absorb the powers of the villains whose sins he cleansed, making him immensely powerful. However, despite being crazy capable in terms of what he could do and his power set, Carter was defeated with logic when he was made to question his own actions and his philosophies, learning that he himself had been manipulated. As a result, he took himself out of the picture, taking his own life. Still, Sin Eater has died and returned before, and it could very well happen again in the future. Which honestly, I feel like I'd like, because I feel like Sin Eater, he was really cool. Now he's gone. Sad. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving the Spider-Man comics as much as we are loving the Spider-Man comics, and you're also excited for what's coming after, I know I am, be sure to show that by giving this video a thumbs up. We're gonna have so much Spider-Man soon, it's gonna be crazy. I'm so here for it. Number 8. Scorpion. Scorpion not only has made an appearance on the big screen, but is currently running with the Savage Six in the comics. Scorpion is Matt Gargan, a villain who in recent years had been painted as pretty terrifying. Remember during Dark Reign when he was Norman Osborn's Spider-Man, running around wearing the Venom symbiote and eating people? Yeah, that was a thing that happened. Matt Gargan has proven multiple times how intimidating and strong he can be, and he still remains someone to be feared even as he returns to his more classic look, power set, and mantle. Number 7. Mr. Negative. Mr. Negative is back, baby! Initially, he was cleansed of all his sins by Sin Eater, as his Martin Lee persona wanted to be fully free of Mr. Negative, his darker or negative half. However, after Sin Eater's cleansings were undone, Mr. Negative returned and attempted to take over Martin Lee once more. After calling on the inner demons who threatened to harm Aunt May in Lee's presence, he surrendered himself and became Mr. Negative once again. Kingpin, it seems, has allied himself with Mr. Negative and has also returned his former territories of NYC to him to rule over. Number 6. Mysterio. Mysterio is a villain who recently got a boost when he made his way to the big screen, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. There he was Quentin Beck, a man who used to work for Tony Stark creating tech, but after being humiliated by him, he set out to rewrite his story and make himself a hero. To do this, however, he would need to face some pretty big monsters and would need access to some pretty massive amounts of tech to pull off the illusion of him doing so. He tricked Peter Parker and ultimately Talos and his partner, who were disguised as Nick Fury and Maria Hill respectively, and were actually working for the real Fury, and ended up gaining access to a network of Stark drones and satellites the world over, which Tony Stark had bequeathed control of to Peter Parker originally after his death. Even after he was defeated in Far From Home, Mysterio still managed to come out on top in the end when he somehow, from beyond the grave, leaked Spider-Man's true identity to the world. I really don't believe he's dead. And also made Spider-Man look like a complete villain who had killed the heroic Mysterio. In the comics, Mysterio seemingly perishes only to return once more, claiming to be actually good this time, but of course, it's Mysterio, so he can never really be trusted, can he? And if you want to check out that whole thing, you should go check out Sinister War issue number 1. Number 5. Mysterio. Mysterio recently got a pretty big win in the MCU, in typical Mysterio style, I must say. While he hasn't been doing too hot in the comics lately, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in Spider-Man Far From Home, Mysterio managed to earn Spider-Man's trust and even infiltrate S.H.I.E.L.D., making them believe he was a hero from an alternate world. I'm not going to lie, even I personally wanted to believe it. It turned out this was not true, and while his backstory was a little different here, Mysterio here was still a master at illusion and a full-on villain. In the end, Quentin Beck would seemingly die during a confrontation with Spider-Man, but it turns out he had one more trick up his sleeve. And at the end of the film, we see a video recording of Beck that incriminates Spider-Man and also reveals his true identity as Peter Parker. He's gonna be in a lot of trouble in the next movie, I think. Number 4. Kraven. Kraven's Last Hunt is a story that forever sticks out in comic book history. Especially in Spider-Man's history, it is a dark tale where Kraven finally captures his most prized prey, Spider-Man. What's more, it's also implied he kills Spidey. He then proceeds to take Spider-Man's place, proving once and for all that not only is he capable of capturing and killing the hero, but also aiming to prove that he's better than Spider-Man by beating down all his villains brutally. In the end, we learn that Spider-Man was not actually dead, but in a comatose, death-like state all this while. He returns and Kraven acknowledges that while he seemingly won to do what Spider-Man does while keeping to his moral code is actually an impressive feat. Something that Kraven likely wouldn't actually be able to do. His final hunt complete, it's then implied that Kraven takes his own life. Number 3. Kingpin. There are a few times that Kingpin has beaten Spider-Man throughout the comics and alternate universes that we have explored. At one point, he actually manages to kill MJ in a what-if version of Back in Black, and while Spider-Man manages to hunt him down and even kills him, in the end, Kingpin's actions turn Spider-Man into a villain. So I'd still consider that a win for Kingpin. But what I'd really like to focus on here is the time that Kingpin managed to kill Spider-Man in Sony's groundbreaking animated film Into the Spider-Verse, one of my favorite films of all time. Here, Kingpin manages to actually kill Peter Parker, the current Spider-Man of Miles Morales' universe. Although Miles would also learn of alternate universes with their own Spider-Men, Spider-Girls, and even Spider-Pigs. He would also learn of his newfound powers and himself have to protect the city as a new Spider-Man. But still, when it came to the Peter Parker of his reality, Kingpin killed him. He dead. He dead. So dead. Never coming back. Number 2, Dr. Octopus. Doc Ock actually succeeds in taking Spider-Man's place, not just by impersonating him, but by actually swapping bodies with the hero. That the two swap bodies, wah 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 wah, with Peter ending up stuck in the dying form of Doc Ock and Doc Ock's mind now within the young and superpowered body of Spider-Man. Oh my goodness. Eventually he would relinquish this form, giving it back to Peter when he realized he was incapable of making the tough decisions required of a more heroic spirit. But for a time, we'd come to know this version of villain and hero combined as Superior Spider-Man. And if you're wondering, but wait a minute, didn't Peter die in Doc Ock's body? Yes, but also his consciousness lived still on in his mind. It's a little confusing, but if you read it, it makes sense. It's like comic book confusing, just if you are explaining it quickly to someone in a list. Number 1, Green Goblin. You can take Peter's body, you can take his mind, you can ruin his reputation, but one of the worst things you can ever do to him is to break his heart. There are many ghosts that haunt Peter Parker, but one of the most meaningful ones to this day remains that of Gwen Stacy. Gwen was Peter's childhood sweetheart. Before he and MJ were together and were a thing, he was with Gwen, who was also a science enthusiast and academic like Peter. Gwen ended up being taken hostage by the Green Goblin and thrown from a bridge. When Peter as Spider-Man went to save her with his web shooters, it's implied that his own attempt to do so was what killed her. The tension from his web caused her neck to snap. Norman Osborn has remained one of Spider-Man's most iconic villains to this day, and for many, the moment Green Goblin killed Gwen Stacy was where this shift really happened for his character, making him Spider-Man's greatest and most feared nemesis.
And at 10, Chameleon. Being the first villain Spider-Man ever faced way back in Amazing Spider-Man #1 in 1963, I think Chameleon is more underrated than he should be. Being able to look like anyone at any time is pretty damn overpowered, especially when you can use it to look like Spider-Man and use suction cups to stick to walls, even if that's slightly unrealistic. This character is especially powerful when he has superpowers, like in the 90s animated Spider-Man series, where he could simply look at you and end up transforming into you. That's actually insanely overpowered when you look at it like that, since he can also transform his clothes in that show. He could be fleeing from Spider-Man and then turn the corner and be anyone, so it's certainly someone to fear, unless they're the original version who has to use disguises and makeup to look like anyone they want, since that process takes time and it can't really be turned on or off at will. And at 9, Mysterio. First appearing in the Amazing Spider-Man #13 from 1964, Quentin Beck does not possess any superhuman abilities. He is a formal special effects artist, illusionist, and actor who uses his talents to commit crimes. He is a founding member of the Sinister Six as well, which is an impressive feat on its own considering how he has no powers. In the first battle with Spider-Man after he frames Spider-Man for robbing the Midtown Museum, Mysterio obstructs the hero's spider sense with gas and dissolves his webbing with chemical abrasive. However, Spider-Man tricks Mysterio into revealing that he was the actual one who robbed the museum. Then Spider-Man revealed that he had captured that moment on tape. Mysterio was then sent to jail, blaming Spider-Man for his ruined career. However, the abilities of Mysterio are actually really impressive, with a lot of his powers seemingly only being able to be accomplished with CGI and post-production rather than with practical effects, which is what he was using. And I was actually going to be a special effects artist. I even started going to school for it, so trust me, his stuff is absolutely insane. And at 8, Venom. The symbiote that later became known as Venom was created by the Dark Elder God Null on a desolate nameless planet, where it saved a group of newborn baby rodenttoid aliens by bonding to them and transforming them into apex predators. The symbiote's first human host though was Deadpool, who came across its prison while on Battleworld and, hoping for a makeover, wore the creature for a few minutes before realizing it was alive and trying to take over his mind. Concerned that his insanity would adversely affect it, Deadpool returned the symbiote to its prison moments before the arrival of Spider-Man, whose own suit had been damaged in the battle that was going on outside that Deadpool just seemingly was ignoring. Spider-Man had found the prison module that the symbiote was trapped in and activated the machine, which released the symbiote in the form of a black sphere. When Spider-Man touched the sphere, it covered his body and transformed into the iconic black and white costume with large white spider emblems on the chest and back derived from Null's dragon emblem actually. Venom, even though the concept was bought from a fan for what would now be worth $550, became one of, if not the most iconic Spider-Man Spider-Man villain, and with the ability to block out the spider sense, it's a surprise Peter even managed to come out on top. And at 7, Spider-Carnage. Spider-Carnage is my favorite alternate version of Spider-Man. From what I could find being introduced in the Spider-Man animated series in the 1990s, this version of Peter Parker shared most of his life with his actually good counterpart. However, the difference between the two was that at some point Aunt May also died, being buried next to Uncle Ben. But thanks to some messing around with interdimensional portals, a version of the Carnage symbiote sensed Peter's anger and combined with him, turning him into Spider-Carnage, a villain set on revenge and the destruction of all realities. Peter Parker with the Carnage symbiote and then a desire to destroy reality, oh my god. However, he was ultimately defeated when the main series Peter brought the Uncle Ben from another universe to talk to Spider-Carnage and actually brought him down, and made him sacrifice himself to save all reality. Damn, I love this show, I really do. If you haven't seen it, it's on Disney+, please watch it if you can, it's so good. And at 6, Morlun. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2 number 30 in 2001, Morlun is one of the most influential Spider-Man villains of all time. Morlun is potentially the biggest threat Spider-Man has ever faced, even if he isn't the most powerful, since defeating him ended up requiring a whole multiverse of spider people, or as the comics were calling them, spider totems, to take him down. Coming from Earth 1, Morlun uses these spider totems to stay alive, feeding on their energy and casually just hopping around from universe to universe, squashing their spider person. This guy is the backbone of the Spider-Verse concept, and a load of spider totems had to team up in order to actually beat him, but not without massive casualties. So definitely a powerful villain that ended up losing overall, but maybe I guess he didn't lose since he did kill off multiple spider people before his actual defeat. Well, I mean, I guess it depends on how he looks at defeat and what his definition of the term is, since some people could consider killing one person a success, so who knows?
Coming in at number 5, we have Kangaroo. I brought this up in the first video. If you're a villain or a hero and you're choosing your power, you don't have to pick something lame. It seems like some of these villains focus way too much on the branding of their super persona rather than the powers. With Kangaroo, it seemed that the villain was set on theming themselves after kangaroos rather than having a cool power. He has implants in his legs that allow him to jump very far, and he's also a skilled boxer. Like, not the worst combination of things, but when you're hell bent on taking out Spidey by stomping on him, you're probably going to lose a lot. There was this weird time in the 70s and 80s where Australia was this thing that the media was trying to push. It was foreign, it was interesting, no one really knew how to sell it. The closest that we got was Crocodile Dundee. But this villain seems like the big wigs at Marvel wanted to make an Australian themed villain because they thought kids would like it, rather than thinking of a good character first. Coming in at number 4, we have the Swarm. Have you guys seen that episode of South Park where they make a joke that the writers from Family Guy are just manatees in a tank and they all pull out 3 random topics to base an episode around? Well, that's what the Swarm feels like. They were like, German scientists, killer bees, purple cape. This dude is lame, not only because he's a swarm of bees that is being controlled by a dead scientist's consciousness, but also because this dude gets beat by bug repellent. When him and Spidey face off, Spidey's able to beat him by spraying down his suit in bug spray, and then the Swarm literally can't get close enough to fight and has to run away. If your weakness can be purchased at Home Depot, then you're a pretty lame villain if you ask me. Coming in at number 3, we have Grizzly. I like how in the Marvel universe, if you're a bear enthusiast, you'll eventually get superpowers and become one of the lamest villains that Peter Parker has to fight on a semi-regular basis. But if you're a bear enthusiast in real life, you just get eaten by bears. 2 very different outcomes. Well, Maxwell Markham was just that, a dude who loves bears, and get this, he was also a wrestler who hurt his fellow wrestlers too much, so he got kicked out of the league. We got a dude who loves bears, he used to be a wrestler. What's the third thing that's going to set this guy into the manatee formula? Oh, he was also given a bear suit that would hook him up with some superpowers. Where did he get this suit? Well, he got it from the Jackal, who's one of Spider-Man's best villains, but that dude has a lot of dud moves. I feel like the Jackal just wakes up some days and is like, what if I gave a dude a bear suit so he thought he was a real villain and then Spider-Man would have to deal with it? That would be jokes. Some of his plots sound more like pranks than actual schemes to cause mayhem. Coming in at number 2, we have Hypno-Hustler. Next, we have a villain that not only has a lame weakness, but their powers were used to such a small scale that doesn't really make any sense why this character was ever made. Hypno-Hustler is Anthony Del Soin. And he has music that can take over your mind. His songs allow him to control people around him and then they do his bidding. But the thing is, if he hears his own music, he will also become hypnotized. He can't even handle his own groovy music, which seems strange. I've never heard of a hypnotist hypnotizing themselves. But when we first see Hypno-Hustler, he's shaking people down for just their pocket change at a show. I feel like this guy should have had bigger dreams. If he got one of his songs on the radio, he could have taken over the world. And coming at the number 1 spot, we have Humbug. Here's the thing, when you hear that there's a hero based off a spider, that's kinda cool, because at least spiders are scary, they make web, they do some interesting things. But when you hear there's a villain that just has a general insect theme, you can throw that one in the trash. I really couldn't dislike this villain more. For one, he should be able to beat Spider-Man because he's got a super suit that gives him skills that are on par with the web slinger. But this guy has the worst weakness of all, a love for bugs. He loves bugs so much that Spider-Man has been able to halt this guy from a life of crime by telling him he's going to smash some cockroaches. Like, dude, give your head a shake. Coming in at number 10, we have Frogman. I mean, if you don't have any powers, you don't have to commit to a super lame animal. Frogman is Eugene Petilio. There was a time when he took his frog suit and he tried to take on some of the hardest hitting street level Marvel heroes. More than once did he come face to face with Spidey, and every time he was taken into the dirt almost immediately. And it's not hard to figure out why. The guy built a suit where the only power was how high he could jump. Like, if you're going to get your powers from some sort of accident or you're born with them, then you don't have a choice. You have to stick with whatever your weird power is. That's your life. But if you're building a power, then you can be whoever you want. Why would you choose frogs? There are so many other creatures you could go with. Like the Falcon. Even though he's not the coolest hero of all time, he's a million times cooler than the dude who hops around and tries to cause some havoc. On the bright side, Eugene's son eventually takes on the mantle of the frog suit and tries to be a hero, but on the downside, Eugene's son sucks at being a hero as much as his dad sucks at being a villain. So in the end, the family was doomed to be on the sidelines. I would like to see one of those what if comics where Frogman becomes the greatest hero of all time.
Hey guys, if you like these videos and you want to see some more, make sure you hit that like button. Number 9, the Trapster. His name is Peter Petruski, and I can't believe how long he's been around. Marvel has him come back again and again, despite the fact that he's got no powers other than this weird paste gun. He invented a super adhesive liquid paste, and loves using it for evil. He's redesigned his costume multiple times, always ridiculous and far too proud of himself, but he has definitely been around. He appears in multiple stories and has gone up against the likes of Daredevil, Fantastic Four, and of course Spider-Man. All with just a goo gun. He is hired by Red Skull at one point and even has a run-in with Ghost Rider. His paste was once confused for Spider-Man's webbing, and Trapster was furious to see Spidey getting credit in the newspaper for his crimes. Trapster is undeniably lame, but he's obviously got some fans because he's been around so long, so we'll leave him here at number 9. Lame, but not the worst.
And coming in at number 8, we have Staggron, the Dinosaur Man. Once again, if you get to pick your powers, maybe you should shoot a little higher than being a species that already went extinct. They already lost the battle with nature. You think they will be able to take down superheroes? Staggron was originally Dr. Vincent Staggron. He was a scientist who took a liking to the serum which turned Kirk Connors into the Lizard Man, and he decided he would up the ante a little bit. He mixed the formula with dinosaur DNA and then shot it all up inside his body and turned into a dinosaur-human hybrid. He then went on to try and make an army of dinosaurs to try and take over the world, but was taken down by a force he didn't expect. It was winter. Dinosaurs are cold-blooded apparently, so when winter came around, they all went to sleep, including Staggron. If you're picking your superpower, you should go with something that can handle temperatures below 10 degrees Celsius. Unless you're in Florida or something. If you're down there, you can build the biggest dinosaur army you want, and the state would probably be fine with it.
Number 7, Slide. This guy was a chemical engineer who created a chemical coating that eliminated all friction between that object and surfaces. He's like the opposite of Trapster. He invented the ultimate lubricant. Then this evil tycoon buys up the company that he works for and shuts down the lab. Slide, aka Jalome Beecher, was going to build his own company founded on the non-stick solution he invented, but no bank was willing to give him a loan. So he did what anybody would do and decides to rob the bank. He makes himself a costume out of this material and, free from the clutches of friction, is able to zip around skating on the ground up to 30 miles per hour and can't be stopped, not by people's grabbing hands or even Spider-Man's sticky webbing. Now, this isn't exactly the most lame villain, but the idea of the slippery criminal sliding all over the place just doesn't really do it for me. Where's the stakes? Spidey could just wait for this guy to slip and fall off of a cliff or into oncoming traffic, or they could just have him slip and slide right into a jail cell. I'll say one thing, the way that he zips all over the place in the comic panels looks like a lot of fun. Number 6, the Walrus. With big wet flippers and menacing tusks and the blood-curdling cries of "Arf, arf," it's easy to see how terrifying a walrus-based supervillain could be. This guy is not. Hubert Carpenter was created when his uncle, a janitor, tried again and again to give Hubert powers. They exhausted the names of animals he could have the proportionate strength of all the way through the alphabet till they got to the letter W. He was totally stumped and then became inspired by a poster of the Beatles and becomes the Walrus. He goes on a classic spree of mass destruction, eventually seeing Beast lecturing at a university and decides to attack him to prove that he's the greatest product of modern science. Hilariously enough, it's actually Frogman who gets the credit for taking him down later, and this really gets the blubber boiling. Spider-Man can't help laughing when he meets this guy and winds up taking him down for the second time with just a tap of his finger.
Halfway through into number 5, Kingpin. Wilson Fisk. First appearing in The Amazing Spider-Man number 50 in 1967, Wilson Grant Fisk is a wealthy entrepreneur and philanthropist by day, but secretly is a criminal mastermind running nearly all of New York's underground activities. The character has been adapted into multiple different media, including video games, TV, movies, and cartoons as well. But could the character be coming to the MCU? It's possible, with fans speculating the introduction of Matt Murdock, also known as Daredevil, as Peter's lawyer in No Way Home. Both characters the Kingpin is associated with will be in the MCU, and considering the magnitude of that and his existence in the Daredevil Netflix series, it's certainly possible we get Wilson Fisk on the big screen. The reason people believe Matt Murdock to be in this movie is thanks to a slight differentiation in the leaked trailer versus the official one. In the scene where the files are slammed onto the desk, in the leaked trailer we can see this man's face. However, in the official one his face is out of frame. This seems to indicate the desire to keep his character secret, but is this the case, or is Marvel just pulling a double bluff? I guess we'll have to wait until Christmas to find out. In at 4, Kraven the Hunter. Kraven the Hunter is one of Spider-Man's earlier villains, appearing first in The Amazing Spider-Man number 15 from 1964. Since then, Kraven has endured as one of the web-slinger's most formidable foes, and is part of the collective of adversaries that make up Spider-Man's rogues gallery. Kraven has since come into conflict with other heroes as well, such as the Black Panther. He is also the half-brother of the Chameleon, and is one of the founding members of the Sinister Six. With the potential of Chameleon being introduced in No Way Home, we also have to consider Kraven's likelihood of appearing, especially considering how he's getting his own movie in the Sony Spider-Man universe, which means if the two universes ever merge or cross over due to some other spell gone wrong, the character will surely make an appearance or at least be confirmed, even if he's not on screen, because you know, he'll be in that universe. Kraven is one of Spider-Man's most iconic villains and is one that I see as a recurring request by fans. I certainly think that there are more interesting characters that could be used instead, but I'd still be happy to see him in the MCU. Getting close to the end, in at number 3, Spider-Carnage. Spider-Carnage is my favorite alternate version of Spider-Man. Being introduced in the Spider-Man animated series from the 1990s, this version of Peter Parker shared most of his early life with the superior counterpart. However, the difference between the two was Aunt May at some point died as well, being buried next to Uncle Ben. But thanks to some messing around with interdimensional portals by Jonathan Owen, a version of the Carnage symbiote sensed this Peter's anger and combined with him, turning him into Spider-Carnage, a villain set on revenge and the destruction of all realities. Man after my own heart. This character would require symbiotes to be introduced, but oh my god would I love to see this character on the big screen. Even if he only appeared in the final few episodes, Spider-Carnage is one of the coolest iterations of Spider-Man to date in my opinion, and is part of the reason why I love the 90s cartoon so much. Seeing this on screen would be a dream come true for me, and while it may not be possible, I want it so bad. I also want a pop figure of this character, because just That would be sick. Penultimately, in at number 2, symbiotes. On a more general note, symbiotes in the MCU would also be incredible. While they are mostly, I'm sure, going to be limited to the SSU, they would be required to see Spider-Carnage or any other really insane versions of characters, like Red Goblin or even Venomized anything. Even if it's not Venom or Carnage, someone like Scream, Toxin, or even Anti-Venom would make an amazing addition in my opinion. The first appearances of a symbiote occurs in The Amazing Spider-Man number 252, The Spectacular Spider-Man number 90, and Marvel Team-Up number 141, all of which released concurrently in May of 1984, in which Spider-Man brings a symbiote home to Earth after the Secret Wars. Secret Wars number 8, which was released months later, actually details how he got the symbiote. The concept was created by a Marvel Comics reader, with the publisher purchasing the idea for $220. The original design was then modified by Mike Zeck, becoming the Venom symbiote. The concept would then be explored and used throughout multiple storylines, spin-off comics, and derivative projects. Imagine pitching something as big as that and being paid $220 for it. Well, okay, adjusting for inflation, that would be $516 now, which isn't bad honestly, but for a character like Venom, is absolutely abysmal. Finally, in at number 1, Morlun. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2 number 30 in 2001, Morlun would be an incredible addition to the MCU, especially if they want to continue in the Spider-Verse sort of direction they appear to be starting in No Way Home. Morlun is potentially the biggest threat Spider-Man has ever faced, requiring a whole multiverse of spider people, or as they're referred to in the comics, spider totems, to take him down. Coming from Earth 001, Morlun uses these spider totems to stay alive, feeding on their energy and casually jumping from universe to universe to just squash their spider person like a bug. This guy is the backbone of the Spider-Verse concept, since a load of spider totems had to team up in order to take him down, but not without massive casualties. If they ever want a whole Avengers movie with just spider people, this would be the way to go.